"Sir, you cannot go down there. This is a restricted emergency zone." The hospital security guard's voice echoed through the chaos-filled lobby of San Francisco General Hospital as 68-year-old Frank Morrison, wearing his simple gray cardigan and khaki pants, stood calmly before the elevator to the flooded basement levels. Around them, emergency crews rushed past carrying equipment. Water dripped from ceiling tiles, and the hospital's backup generators hummed ominously. What happened next would prove that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen when someone chooses to help, even when they have absolutely no authority to do so, because 47 minutes later, this quiet elderly man would perform an underwater rescue so dangerous, so technically precise, that it would save a critical patient's life and leave an entire hospital staff speechless about what military training can accomplish in the most impossible circumstances. But first, let me take you back to how this extraordinary night began. Frank had come to San Francisco General Hospital that stormy Thursday evening to visit his old Navy buddy, Chief Petty Officer James Doc Martinez, who was recovering from hip surgery. The October rain had been pounding the city for 3 days straight, and the hospital's aging infrastructure was showing the strain. Frank had just finished his visit with Doc Martinez when the emergency alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors, and he could hear urgent announcements over the intercom. "All non-essential personnel evacuate basement levels immediately. Water levels rising in sub-basement 3. As Frank made his way toward the main elevator, he overheard a frantic conversation between Dr. Rebecca Stone, the chief of cardiology, and hospital administrator Kevin Walsh. "Kevin, we have a crisis," Dr. Stone said, her voice tight with stress. "Mrs. Eleanor Thompson in room B312 is on life support after her massive heart attack this afternoon. The flooding knocked out power to the backup generators on that level. Her ECMO machine and ventilator are running on battery power only. Maybe 20 minutes left." Walsh ran his hands through his hair. The fire department's dive team is dealing with 3 other emergencies across the city. Coast Guard estimates 2 hours before they can get a technical diver here. The basement is completely flooded, 8 feet of water, electrical hazards everywhere, and the access stairs are underwater. "Kevin, she'll be dead in 20 minutes without that equipment. We need someone who can dive down there and manually restart the backup generator, but it's impossible. The electrical panels are completely submerged, and one wrong move could electrocute whoever tries it." Frank stopped walking. His weathered face grew thoughtful as he processed what he'd heard. 8 feet of water, electrical hazards, underwater equipment operation. This was exactly the type of technical diving scenario he'd trained for during his Navy SEAL years, specifically during the underwater demolition and electrical systems work in Vietnam river operations. He approached Dr. Stone and Walsh. "Excuse me, doctor, I couldn't help but overhear. I might be able to help with your situation downstairs." Administrator Walsh looked Frank up and down, an elderly man in civilian clothes, gray hair, calm demeanor. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but this requires professional dive equipment and electrical expertise. It's extremely dangerous." "I understand the risks," Frank said quietly. "I have experience with underwater electrical systems and technical diving in hazardous conditions." Dr. Stone shook her head. "Mr. Morrison, Frank Morrison. Mr. Morrison, this isn't a swimming pool situation. We're talking about diving in contaminated floodwater, navigating underwater in complete darkness, and working with high-voltage electrical systems while submerged. One mistake, and you'd be electrocuted instantly." Frank nodded respectfully. "Doctor, I understand your concerns, but that patient downstairs, she doesn't have 2 hours to wait for the Coast Guard, and I've worked underwater electrical systems before." Walsh stepped forward. "Sir, even if you had the skills, which I seriously doubt, we can't allow civilians to attempt rescue operations. The liability issues alone would shut us down. Hospital policy is very clear on this." "What's your liability if she dies waiting for authorization?" Frank asked simply. The question hung in the air as both hospital administrators exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew Frank was right, but protocol was protocol. Dr. Stone's pager buzzed urgently. She checked it, and her face paled. "The patient's oxygen levels are dropping faster than expected. We have maybe 15 minutes before brain damage becomes irreversible." Frank looked toward the elevator that led to the flooded basement levels. "Where would I find diving equipment in a hospital?" "You wouldn't," Walsh said firmly. "And you're not going down there. I'm calling security to escort you out of the building." This conversation is over. As if summoned by his words, Security Chief Marcus Rodriguez, a stocky man in his 30s with the build of an ex-cop, arrived at their location. "Mr. Walsh, I heard you needed assistance with civilian evacuation." Walsh pointed at Frank. "This gentleman is offering to help with the basement situation, but he's not authorized personnel. Please escort him to the main exit." Rodriguez studied Frank for a moment. Something about the older man's bearing, his calm presence in the chaos, reminded him of his own grandfather who'd served in Korea. But rules were rules. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. The basement levels are off limits to all non-emergency personnel." Frank looked one more time toward the elevator, then back at Dr. Stone. "Doctor, does the hospital have any diving equipment? Emergency oxygen tanks, underwater flashlights?" Dr. Stone hesitated. "We have emergency oxygen in the supply closets, and maintenance keeps underwater inspection equipment for the building's foundation work." "But Mr. Morrison—" Rebecca, Walsh interrupted. "Don't encourage this. Mr. Morrison, you need to leave. Now." Frank nodded slowly and began walking toward the exit with Security Chief Rodriguez. But as they passed the maintenance supply room, Frank noticed something Rodriguez didn't. The door was propped open, and inside he could see exactly what he needed: maintenance diving gear, underwater flashlights, and emergency oxygen tanks. "Chief Rodriguez," Frank said as they walked, "you seem like a man who understands duty." "I do my job, yes, sir." "Did you serve?" Rodriguez glanced at him. "Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan." "Why?" "Then you understand the weight of watching someone die when you have the skills to save them." Rodriguez's steps slowed slightly. "Sir, I can't let you—" The lights in the corridor flickered ominously, and another urgent announcement crackled over the intercom. "Critical patient in sub-basement 3. Life support systems failing. Estimate 10 minutes remaining battery power." Frank and Rodriguez stopped walking. 10 minutes. A human life hanging in the balance. "Chief," Frank said quietly, "I serve too. Navy. Underwater operations. I've done exactly this type of technical diving before. Electrical systems, hazardous conditions, life or death rescues. That woman down there is going to die if someone doesn't act in the next 10 minutes. Rodriguez stared at Frank for a long moment. The older man's calm confidence, his military bearing, the specific way he'd mentioned technical diving and electrical systems. It all rang true to someone who'd served in combat. "What exactly would you need?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Frank's eyes sharpened. "Diving mask, emergency oxygen tank, underwater flashlight, insulated gloves, and 5 minutes to study the hospital's electrical schematics for that basement level. You really think you can restart a submerged backup generator?" "Chief, in 1967, I restarted the electrical systems on a half-sunk Navy patrol boat 30 feet underwater in the Mekong Delta with Viet Cong shooting at the surface. Hospital basement electrical panels are less complicated than naval combat systems." Rodriguez looked back down the corridor where Dr. Stone was pacing frantically, checking her watch every few seconds. Then he looked at Frank, really looked at him. The man's steady hands, his alert eyes, the way he carried himself despite his age. "Mr. Morrison," Rodriguez said slowly, "I'm going to make a decision that might cost me my job. But I've seen too many good people die waiting for permission." He led Frank back toward the maintenance supply room. Chief Rodriguez had made his choice. Within 3 minutes, he'd helped Frank gear up with the maintenance diving equipment and provided him with the hospital's basement electrical schematics. Dr. Stone, against Administrator Walsh's furious protests, had shown Frank exactly where the backup generator and electrical panels were located in the flooded sub-basement. "The water is contaminated with sewage and medical waste," Dr. Stone warned as Frank checked his diving mask. "Visibility will be 0. The electrical panels are along the north wall, about 6 feet underwater now. The backup generator switch is a manual lever. You'll have to feel for it in complete darkness." Frank studied the schematics one final time. "Doctor, once I restart the backup power, how long before the life support systems come back online?" 30 seconds, maybe less, but Frank— Dr. Stone hesitated, using his first name, now that she'd accepted what was about to happen. "If you make contact with any live electrical current while you're submerged, you'll be killed instantly. There's no margin for error." Frank nodded calmly. "Understood. Chief Rodriguez, I need you to maintain communication with the cardiology unit. The moment those machines come back online, you radio me. If something goes wrong down there, at least Dr. Stone will know the equipment is working. Rodriguez handed him a waterproof radio. Channel 3. I'll be monitoring. Administrator Walsh made one final protest. This is absolute insanity. I'm not authorizing this action, and I'm documenting that this rescue attempt is being performed against hospital policy. Frank looked at Walsh with the same calm dignity he'd shown throughout the crisis. Mr. Walsh, I understand your position, but in about 6 minutes, you're going to have to choose between explaining to Mrs. Thompson's family why you followed policy or explaining why you didn't. I'd rather face a lawsuit than a funeral. With that, Frank Morrison, 68 years old, wearing improvised diving gear in a hospital maintenance room, prepared to descend into 8 feet of contaminated floodwater to perform one of the most dangerous technical rescues of his life. The basement stairwell was completely submerged. Frank stood at the top of the stairs, breathing steadily through his emergency oxygen system, waterproof flashlight strapped to his wrist. The water below was dark, murky, and filled with debris from the flooding. Mrs. Thompson has maybe 4 minutes left. Dr. Stone's voice crackled through the radio. Frank took one last breath of clean air, secured his breathing apparatus, and descended into the flooded darkness. The water was shockingly cold and absolutely black. Frank's flashlight beam penetrated maybe 3 feet through the murky water, filled with floating debris, medical supplies, and unidentifiable hospital waste. He oriented himself using the wall, following the basement corridor toward the electrical room, exactly as the schematics had shown. Swimming underwater through a flooded hospital basement was unlike any environment Frank had encountered, even during his most challenging Navy operations. The water was thick with contamination, making every movement sluggish. Floating debris constantly bumped against his mask and equipment. And somewhere in this underwater maze were live electrical systems that could kill him instantly if he made contact. Frank reached the electrical room door, which was standing open, water flowing freely through the doorframe. He swam inside, using his flashlight to locate the backup generator and electrical panel along the north wall, exactly where the schematics indicated. The backup generator was a large industrial unit, completely submerged but still accessible. Frank located the manual restart lever Dr. Stone had described, a heavy metal switch that had to be pulled up to engage the backup power system. But there was a problem the schematics hadn't shown. The electrical panel directly above the generator was sparking intermittently underwater, sending small electrical charges through the water around the generator area. One spark, one moment of contact while Frank was touching the metal restart lever, and he'd be electrocuted. Frank floated motionless for a moment, calculating. The sparking was random, every 15 to 20 seconds. He'd have to time his approach perfectly, grab the restart lever between electrical pulses, and pull it up in one smooth motion. His radio crackled. Frank, 2 minutes left. Patient's vitals are critical. No time for hesitation. Frank positioned himself directly below the restart lever, watching the sparking pattern. 15 seconds. Spark. 18 seconds. Spark. 21 seconds. Spark. The interval was getting longer as the electrical system's power weakened. Frank counted 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. He grabbed the restart lever and pulled up with all his strength. The heavy switch engaged with a solid mechanical click, and immediately Frank heard the backup generator roar to life underwater. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the basement, and he could see the electrical panel stop sparking as power was properly restored to the hospital's backup systems. Generator restart successful. Frank's voice came through the radio clearly. Backup power is restored. Dr. Stone's voice responded immediately. Life support systems are online. ECMO machine functioning, ventilator operational, patient vitals stabilizing. Frank, you did it. But Frank wasn't finished. His Navy training had taught him that emergency electrical systems needed to be checked for stability after underwater restart procedures. He swam to each of the basement's electrical panels, using his flashlight to verify that power was flowing properly and no systems were overloading. It was during this final safety check that Frank discovered something that made his blood run cold. The basement's main water pump, the system that was supposed to be draining the floodwater, had been damaged by debris and was no longer functioning. The water level wasn't dropping. It was actually rising as more storm water continued to flow into the hospital's lower levels. Frank keyed his radio. Chief Rodriguez, we have a secondary problem. The basement drain pump is not functioning. Water levels are continuing to rise. You need to evacuate any remaining patients from the lower hospital levels immediately. Rodriguez's voice came back urgent. How much time do we have? Frank assessed the water level against the basement ceiling. At current rate, maybe 30 minutes before this entire level is completely flooded. Any patients on basement levels 1 and 2 need to be moved to higher floors immediately. Copy that. Emergency evacuation procedures are being initiated now. Frank began his ascent back through the flooded stairwell, but his careful inspection had taken precious time. His emergency oxygen supply was running critically low, and he still had to navigate back through the contaminated water and debris to reach the surface. Swimming through the dark, murky water with failing oxygen reserves, Frank focused on his Navy training: controlled breathing, efficient movement, stay calm under pressure. He'd survived underwater emergencies before, and he'd survived this one. When Frank's head finally broke the surface at the top of the basement stairwell, Chief Rodriguez was waiting with a towel and dry clothes. Behind him, Dr. Stone stood with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor Thompson is stable," she said simply. "You saved her life." As Frank changed out of the soaked diving gear, the full scope of what he'd accomplished began to become clear to the hospital staff. He'd successfully performed an underwater electrical system restart in a contaminated environment, under time pressure, with improvised equipment, and he'd done it flawlessly. Dr. Stone insisted on checking Frank for any injuries or contamination exposure. As she examined him in one of the emergency rooms, she couldn't contain her amazement. "Frank, in my 23 years of emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like what you just did. That electrical panel was sparking underwater. You could have been killed instantly. How did you know the timing would work?" Frank shrugged as Dr. Stone checked his vital signs. Navy taught us that electrical systems underwater have predictable failure patterns. The sparking intervals get longer as power weakens. It was a calculated risk, but the timing was consistent enough to be safe. Safe. Dr. Stone stared at him. "Frank, you just performed technical diving in contaminated water to restart submerged electrical equipment. There was nothing safe about any of it." "Doctor, Mrs. Thompson was going to die without power to her life support. That wasn't acceptable." Chief Rodriguez entered the room with an update. "Frank, the evacuation of the lower levels is complete. All patients have been moved to safety. The water is still rising, but everyone is secure on floors 2 and above." Dr. Stone looked between the two men. "I have to ask, Frank, where exactly did you learn to do underwater electrical work? This wasn't basic swimming. This was highly specialized technical diving." Frank was quiet for a moment, then looked at Rodriguez. "Chief, you served in combat. You understand that some skills stay with you forever." Rodriguez nodded. "Frank mentioned Navy service, Doc. Underwater operations." "Naval?" Dr. Stone's expression changed. "Frank, what exactly was your role in the Navy?" Before Frank could answer, Administrator Walsh burst into the room, his face a mixture of relief and bureaucratic panic. "Morrison, thank God you're safe. Mrs. Thompson's family is demanding to meet the person who saved her life. The media is asking questions about how an unidentified civilian performed a miracle rescue in our basement. I need to know exactly who you are and what authority you had to perform that operation." Frank looked at Walsh calmly. "Mr. Walsh, I had no authority to perform that rescue. I was an unauthorized civilian who chose to help when someone's life was at stake. But your background, your qualifications, don't matter," Frank finished. "What matters is that Mrs. Thompson is alive. Your hospital didn't lose a patient to administrative delays, and Chief Rodriguez made a command decision that saved a life." Walsh shook his head. "Morrison, the insurance companies are going to want documentation. The state health department is asking questions. I need to know your credentials." Dr. Stone stepped forward. "Kevin, does it really matter what Frank's credentials are? He saved a patient's life using skills that none of our authorized personnel possessed. Maybe the question isn't whether he had authority, but why our emergency protocols don't account for situations like this." "Rebecca, you can't be serious. Hospital policy exists for patient safety and liability protection. And tonight, hospital policy would have killed Eleanor Thompson," Dr. Stone replied firmly. "Frank didn't wait for permission because permission would have taken too long. Sometimes that's what real medical care looks like." Frank stood up, his examination complete. "Dr. Stone, Chief Rodriguez, I appreciate everything you've done tonight, but I should let you get back to your duties." "Frank, wait!" Rodriguez called as Frank headed toward the door. "I need to know something. That comment about restarting electrical systems on a Navy patrol boat in Vietnam, that was real, wasn't it? Frank paused at the doorway. Mekong Delta 1967, PBR 714 was taking fire and sinking fast. The electrical systems controlled our radio and weapons. Without power, we were sitting ducks. What happened? I fixed the electrical system underwater while my crew provided covering fire. We got out alive. Frank's voice was matter-of-fact, as if describing routine maintenance rather than a life-or-death combat operation. Dr. Stone stared at him. Frank, what was your rank in the Navy? Frank hesitated for just a moment. I was a Master Chief Petty Officer, Navy SEALs. The room went completely silent. As Frank made his way through the hospital lobby to leave, he encountered someone he hadn't expected to see, retired Army Colonel William Bill Chen, who was visiting his own hospitalized wife and had witnessed the commotion of the evening's emergency. Colonel Chen, a distinguished Asian American man in his 70s, approached Frank with a knowing look. Excuse me, son. I couldn't help but notice the way you handled yourself during that crisis tonight. That bearing, that calm, under pressure. You served, didn't you? Frank nodded respectfully. Navy. Long time ago. Chen studied Frank's face more carefully. Wait a minute. Frank Morrison. Master Chief Frank Morrison. Navy SEALs Underwater Demolition Team Operations. Frank was surprised. Yes, sir. But I don't think we've met. Chen's face lit up with recognition and respect. We haven't met, but I know who you are. I was Army intelligence in Vietnam 1967 to 68. Your name came up in briefings after the Mekong Delta rescue operations. You and your team saved a lot of lives during those river patrol missions. Colonel Chen, that was a team effort. My SEAL unit worked with Army intelligence several times. Frank, I reviewed the after-action reports. The operation where you restarted electrical systems on that damaged patrol boat while under fire. That rescue saved 12 American servicemen. You earned a Bronze Star for that action. Frank's modesty remained unchanged. Sir, we did what the mission required. Chen looked around the hospital lobby, taking in the emergency crews, the staff still dealing with the flooding crisis, and the knowledge of what Frank had just accomplished in the basement. Frank, what you did here tonight, diving into contaminated floodwater to restart electrical systems and save a patient's life. That's the same courage and skill you showed 57 years ago in Vietnam. Some men serve their country in uniform, and then they spend the rest of their lives serving their community as civilians. Colonel, Mrs. Thompson needed help. The right person happened to be available. Chen shook his head. No, Frank, the right person chose to be available, despite having no authority, no official responsibility, and every reason to walk away safely. That's not coincidence. That's character. Behind them, Dr. Stone and Chief Rodriguez had quietly approached, having overheard the conversation. Dr. Stone addressed Colonel Chen. Sir, are you saying that Frank is some kind of military hero? Chen looked at Frank, who remained characteristically humble and quiet. Doctor, Frank Morrison is exactly the kind of military hero our country has always depended on. The ones who serve with excellence, earn the respect of their peers, and then return to civilian life where they continue serving their community without recognition or fanfare. Chen turned back to Frank. How many Bronze Stars did you earn, Master Chief? Frank's voice was barely audible. 3, sir, and a Silver Star. Chief Rodriguez whistled low. Frank, the Silver Star is for extraordinary heroism in combat. What did you do to earn that? Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention. Chief, that was a long time ago. Tonight was about Mrs. Thompson, not about old military service. But Colonel Chen wasn't finished. Frank, I want these fine medical professionals to understand something about the man who just saved their patient. The Silver Star is awarded for gallantry in action against enemy forces. It's the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. Most servicemen never even see one, much less earn one. Dr. Stone was staring at Frank with new understanding. Frank, you're a genuine war hero. And tonight, you risked your life to save a stranger's life, with no authority to do so, no reward expected, and no recognition sought. Frank shrugged. Doctor, every person who works in this hospital risks their life to save strangers every day. That's what medical professionals do. Tonight, I just happened to have a skill set that was needed. But Frank, Rodriguez pressed, you could have been killed down there, electrocuted, drowned, or injured by debris. Why take that risk for someone you've never met? Frank considered the question for a moment, then answered with the quiet wisdom that comes from a lifetime of service. Chief, In the Navy, we have a saying, "We don't leave anyone behind." That doesn't apply only to military operations. Mrs. Thompson was behind the floodwater, behind the electrical failures, behind the bureaucratic delays. She needed someone to go back for her. Colonel Chen nodded approvingly. Frank, that philosophy, that commitment to service, that's why men like you earn the respect of everyone who's ever served alongside you. Dr. Stone had tears in her eyes again. Frank, Mrs. Thompson's family is upstairs right now. They want to thank the person who saved their mother's life. Would you be willing to meet them? Frank looked toward the elevators, then back at Dr. Stone. Doctor, they don't need to thank me. They need to thank Chief Rodriguez for making a command decision under pressure, and you for providing the technical information that made the rescue possible. This was a team effort. Frank, Rodriguez said firmly, you were the one who dove into that contaminated water. You were the one who restarted that electrical system while sparks were flying around you. You were the one who risked everything. Frank's response embodied the humility and wisdom that had defined his entire life of service. Chief, the day you stop being willing to risk everything for a stranger's life is the day you forget what service really means. Tonight wasn't heroism, it was just duty. And duty doesn't require authority, recognition, or permission. It just requires someone willing to act when action is needed. Colonel Chen extended his hand to Frank with deep respect. Master Chief Morrison, it's been an honor to meet you. Men like you are why America has always been defended by the finest military in the world. Frank shook Chen's hand. Colonel, the honor is mine, sir. As Frank finally prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Stone called after him one more time. Frank, how do we thank you for what you did tonight? Frank paused at the hospital's main exit, rain still pouring outside, and looked back at the medical team that had witnessed his extraordinary rescue. Doctor, Mrs. Thompson is going to wake up tomorrow morning because her life support systems kept working. That's all the thanks I need. And Chief Rodriguez, you made the right decision tonight. Trust your instincts and never be afraid to bend the rules when lives are at stake. With that, Frank Morrison, 68-year-old Navy SEAL veteran, Silver Star recipient, and the man who had just performed one of the most dangerous underwater rescues in San Francisco General Hospital's history, walked out into the storm, disappearing into the night as quietly as he had arrived. Behind him, the hospital staff stood in amazed silence, understanding that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a reminder that true heroism doesn't require permission, authority, or recognition. It simply requires the courage to act when duty calls, and the skills to act effectively. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson would make a full recovery. The hospital's basement would be pumped dry and repaired. And somewhere in Sacramento, Frank Morrison would return to his quiet retirement, carrying the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most important service happens when nobody's watching, nobody's giving orders, and nobody's keeping score. Because for men like Frank Morrison, serving others isn't a job. It's a way of life that doesn't end when the uniform comes off.